think boarding school was all discipline and study. In the 1500s, it was worse. Creaking wooden beds, freezing drafts sneaking through stone walls, and the constant fear of strict masters kept students wide-eyed through the night. Add in lice, noisy roommates, and endless prayers, and sleep felt like a luxury. Tonight, we tiptoe into those dark dormitories where rest was as rare as kindness. If peeking into the restless nights of the past helps you appreciate your own bed, you're in the right place. Subscribe now and tap the bell icon for more. Bedtime journeys through history's sleepless corners. Before we continue, I'd love to know where are you listening from and what time is it for you? It's always amazing to see how far our quiet little stories are reaching. You wake to the sound of a bell cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Its bronze voice echoing off stone walls that have contained countless generations of reluctant scholars before you. It is 4:30 in the morning, and summer's early light has not yet touched the narrow windows of your dormitory. The year is 1543, and you are one of 47 boys sleeping in the long, unheated chamber above the day room at St. Bartholomew's Grammar School in Essex. Your feet, having spent the night tucked beneath a thin woolen blanket, meet the cold stone floor with a shock that jolts you fully awake. The boy beside you, Thomas, mutters something unintelligible as he rolls from his straw mattress. Like you, he sleeps in his day clothes, a linen shirt, woolen doublet, and hose that have grown increasingly threadbare since his father, a prosperous cloth merchant from nearby Colchester, paid the school fees 6 months ago. The practice of sleeping clothed serves multiple purposes in this institutional world. It maintains modesty in the communal dormitory, provides additional warmth against the bitter English mornings, and most practically allows for the swift transition from sleep to the first obligations of the academic day around you. The dormitory comes alive with the rustle of straw and the soft groans of boys ranging in age from 7 to 17. The older students, having endured this routine for years, move with mechanical precision through their morning preparations. They understand the unforgiving mathematics of the school day. Any delay in rising means less time for the essential morning ablutions, which in turn risks tardiness to prime the first prayer service of the day. Tardiness, as every boy knows, means an encounter with Master Whitmore's birch rod before the day has properly begun. The dormitory itself tells the story of institutional life through its stark functionality. Measuring 60 feet in length and 20 feet in width, it houses these dozens of boys in a space that wealthy merchants might reserve for storing grain. The walls, constructed of local limestone, bear no decorations save for the wooden crucifix that hangs at the far end, visible even in the gloom thanks to the single oil lamp that burns throughout the night. This lamp, tended by the eldest boy in rotation, provides the only illumination for nighttime necessities, though its weak flame barely penetrates the shadows that seem to pool in every corner. Your sleeping arrangement consists of a simple straw mattress laid directly on wooden planks, elevated just enough from the floor to discourage the mice that nonetheless manage to share your quarters. The mattress, which you share with no one thanks to your father's ability to pay the additional fee for individual bedding, measures roughly 4 feet by 6 feet, adequate for a growing boy, though hardly comfortable. Wealthier students might have a thin feather bolster beneath their heads, but most, like Thomas beside you, make do with a rolled cloak or an extra shirt. The morning routine begins with what the school calls private devotions, a 15-minute period during which boys are expected to offer silent prayers for the success of their studies, the health of their families, and the wisdom of their masters. In practice, this time serves as a buffer, allowing the slowest risers to gather their wits while the more organized students tend to personal hygiene. The school provides each boy with a wooden bowl and a small piece of lye soap, replaced monthly. If the boy's family can afford the extra expense, water comes from a large barrel filled daily from the school's well. though by morning it has usually acquired a thin skin of ice during the colder months. The process of dressing reveals the careful quartos, social stratifications that define your world. Boys from gentle families possess extra shirts, allowing them to maintain some semblance of cleanliness despite the limited washing facilities. You count yourself fortunate that your father, a successful wool factor, has provided you with 3 complete changes of clothing, rotating them weekly when the school's laundress makes her rounds. Thomas, despite his family's prosperity, makes do with 2 sets. While some of the scholarship boys, those whose education is sponsored by local guilds or wealthy patrons, possess only the clothes on their backs, supplemented by whatever cast-offs the older boys might provide. As the bell rings again, signaling 10 minutes until prime, the dormitory takes on the quality of a beehive disturbed. Boys scramble to fold their bedding according to the precise specifications established by Master Whitmore. Blankets folded. In quarters, mattresses arranged in perfect rows. Personal belongings stowed in the small wooden chest that serves as both storage and seat. The chest, another marker of social distinction, varies dramatically in quality. Yours, crafted by a local carpenter and fitted with iron hinges, contrasts sharply with the rough-hewn boxes that contain the possessions of less fortunate classmates. The morning's first inspection occurs as boys file out of the dormitory, descending the day stairs to the cloister below. Brother Marcus, the school's disciplinarian and Master Whitmore's assistant, stands at the foot of the stairs with a wooden rod, though mercifully it remains at his side during this first review of the day. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, despite his advanced age, scan each boy for violations of the dress code. Shirts improperly tucked, hose badly tied, or faces bearing the telltale signs of insufficient washing. Those who fail this initial inspection find themselves sent back upstairs, a delay that guarantees tardiness to prime and the subsequent punishment that follows. The path from dormitory to chapel takes you through the school's central courtyard, a space that during daylight hours serves as both recreational area and outdoor classroom. At this pre-dawn hour, however, it presents an entirely different character. The flagstones, slick with dew or frost depending on the season, require careful navigation to avoid the humiliation of a fall. The pump that provides the school's water supply stands silent, its iron handle waiting for the breakfast detail that will begin their work immediately after prime. Garden plots, tended by the boys as part of their practical education, lie dormant. In the darkness, though you know that come spring, these patches of earth will provide both vegetables for the school's table and lessons in agricultural theory. But what occupies your mind as you join the stream of boys moving toward the chapel is not the beauty of the morning or the promise of knowledge that awaits. Instead, your consciousness is filled with the growing awareness of physical discomfort that will define the next 13 hours of your existence. Your stomach, having received its last sustenance 14 hours ago at yesterday's supper, announces its emptiness with a hollow ache that seems to echo in the courtyard's stone walls. Your bladder, having endured the night's accumulation, presses against your lower abdomen with increasing urgency. Though the school's strict rules prohibit any deviation from the morning routine until after prime, the chapel bell begins its call to worship, a sound that should inspire devotion but instead marks another stage in the relentless progression toward the day's first meal. As you take your assigned place in the chapel arranged, naturally, according to your family's social standing and your academic progress, you find your thoughts drifting not to the prayers you are about to recite, but to the breakfast that waits beyond this 30-minute service. Yet even breakfast, when it finally arrives, will bring its own trials. Watery porridge that barely deserves the name, small beer that tastes of the barrel in which it was stored, and bread that grows staler with each passing day until the weekly delivery from the village bakery. But perhaps most troubling of all is the growing realization that this is merely the beginning. Prime marks not the start of a normal day, but the commencement of an 11-hour academic marathon that will test not just your intellectual capacity, but your physical endurance, your emotional resilience, and your ability to navigate the complex social hierarchies that govern every aspect of life within these walls. The morning routine, methodical and unforgiving as it may be, represents the easiest part of what lies ahead. What thoughts, you wonder, occupy the minds of your fellow students as they mouth the familiar Latin prayers? Do they, like you, find themselves calculating the hours until evening, or have they achieved some state of resignation that allows them to embrace rather than merely endure the institutional rhythm that now governs every aspect of their existence? The chapel service concludes with a final blessing that echoes off stone walls blackened by decades of candle smoke and human breath. As you file out with your fellow students, the sky has lightened just enough to reveal the outlines of the school's buildings, though the sun remains hidden behind the chapel's bell tower. It is now 5:15 in the morning, and breakfast awaits in the great hall, a meal that will provide the first real test of your day's endurance. The Great Hall, originally constructed as part of a minor monastery before the recent dissolution, retains the austere grandeur of its religious origins. Long wooden tables, scarred by years of use and carved with the initials of homesick boys, stretch the length of the room. These tables, each capable of seating 20 students, are arranged according to a strict hierarchy that reflects both age and academic achievement. You take your assigned place at the third table, a position that marks you as neither among the most distinguished scholars nor among the newest arrivals. The morning meal itself reveals the practical challenges of feeding nearly 50 growing TBA boys on the limited budget that defines most grammar school operations. The porridge, served in wooden bowls that retain the flavors of countless previous meals despite regular scrubbing, consists primarily of oats stretched with barley and flavored with whatever vegetables the school's garden can provide. During autumn months, you might discover pieces of turnip or parsnip floating in the gruel. By winter's end, the vegetables have given way to dried peas that add texture, if not flavor, to the mixture. Brother Marcus stands at the hall's head table, reading from the lives of the saints while students eat in silence. This practice, borrowed directly from monastic tradition, serves multiple purposes. It provides moral instruction, maintains order during the meal, and most practically, prevents the conversations that might slow the eating process. Breakfast, like every other aspect of the school day, operates according to a rigid schedule that allows no accommodation for lingering or socializing. The bread that accompanies your porridge tells its own story of institutional economy. Baked twice weekly in the village, it arrives fresh on Monday and Thursday mornings, providing those fortunate enough to be served first with soft, warm loaves that recall the comforts of home. By Wednesday and Saturday, however, the bread has achieved a hardness that requires soaking in the small beer provided with every meal. This beer, weak enough to be considered suitable for children, yet strong enough to be safer than water, carries the flavor of the hops grown in the school's own garden, though the brewing process remains a mystery conducted by Brother Marcus in the cellars beneath the kitchen. As you eat, your attention divides between the mechanical process of consuming your meal and the complex social dynamics that govern even this most basic of activities. The boy to your left, William, tacks his porridge with the desperate efficiency of someone who has learned that hesitation means going hungry. His family, minor gentry from Yorkshire, can afford the school fees but little more, leaving William perpetually on the edge of genuine want. The boy to your right, Edmund, pushes his food around his bowl with the distracted air of someone unaccustomed to such simple fare. His father, a successful London merchant, provides him with a monthly allowance that allows for additional food purchases from the local market, supplements that arrive via servants who travel from the capital specifically to ensure Edmund's comfort. The social stratification extends beyond mere access to additional food. Boys from wealthy families often receive packages from home containing dried fruits, nuts, or preserved meats that they may share or not according to their personal inclinations and strategic social calculations. These food gifts serve as currency in the complex economy of schoolboy friendships. Traded for assistance with difficult Latin translations, protection from older boys' bullying, or simply the comfort of companionship during the long winter evenings. The breakfast period also provides the first opportunity to observe the physical toll that institutional life takes on growing boys. Many of your classmates show signs of the nutritional deficiencies that result from the school's limited diet, pale complexions that speak of insufficient fresh vegetables, thin frames that suggest chronic hunger despite regular meals, and a general lethargy that seems to settle over the hall like morning mist. The school's physician, who visits monthly to examine the boys for signs of serious illness, has noted with concern the increasing prevalence of what he terms scholarly melancholy, a condition he attributes to the combination of intensive study, limited physical activity, and separation from family comforts. At 5:45, Brother Marcus closes his book and signals the end of the meal with a sharp rap of his wooden staff against the stone floor. Boys rise in unison, offering a brief prayer of thanksgiving before filing toward the great hall's exit. The transition from breakfast to the first academic period requires navigation of the school's limited sanitary facilities, a source of daily frustration and occasional genuine distress. The latrine, constructed according to medieval monastery specifications, consists of a long wooden bench with circular holes cut at regular intervals, positioned over a stream that carries waste away from the school grounds. Privacy remains minimal, with only a low wooden screen separating the facility from the main courtyard. The morning rush creates inevitable delays, as nearly 50 boys attempt to use a facility designed for perhaps half that number. Those who wait too long face the choice between physical discomfort and tardiness to the first lesson, both options carrying their own forms of punishment. The school day's first academic period begins at 6 o'clock sharp with the ringing of the study bell. Students file into the schoolroom, a single large chamber that serves as the venue for all instruction, regardless of subject or student age. The room's arrangement reflects the pedagogical theories that dominate 16th century education. Long wooden benches face a raised platform where Master Whitmore conducts his lessons, with students arranged according to their level of academic advancement rather than their age. Master Whitmore himself presents a figure that embodies both the learning and the severity that characterize grammar school education. A graduate of Cambridge University and former monk whose religious house was dissolved during the recent reforms, he brings to his teaching both extensive knowledge and a worldview shaped by decades of monastic discipline. His day begins at 4 o'clock with private prayers and study of the texts he will teach, ensuring that his preparation exceeds that of even his most dedicated students. The first lesson of every day focuses on Latin grammar, the foundation upon which all other learning rests. Master Whitmore begins with a recitation of conjugations and declensions that the boys chant in unison, their voices echoing off the classroom's stone walls. This oral repetition, continued for 30 minutes without variation, serves to embed grammatical patterns so deeply in students' minds that they become automatic responses rather than conscious intellectual exercises. The pedagogical method, based on principles established by classical authors and refined by medieval educators, emphasizes memorization over understanding, repetition over innovation. Students learn to recite extensive passages from Virgil's Aeneid, Ovid's Metamorphoses, and selected works of Cicero without necessarily grasping the literary or philosophical subtleties that make these works endure. The goal is not to produce original thinkers, but to create young men capable of expressing themselves with the eloquence and precision that mark the educated gentleman as the lesson progresses. Master Whitmore calls upon individual students to demonstrate their mastery of the previous day's assignments. Thomas, the boy who sleeps beside you in the dormitory, rises to translate a passage from Caesar's Commentaries, his voice betraying the nervous tension that accompanies any public performance in this environment. A single error in pronunciation or translation will result in immediate correction, followed by the requirement to repeat the passage correctly 3 times while the class listens in silence. The atmosphere during these recitations carries a weight that extends far beyond the immediate academic exercise. Every boy understands that his performance reflects not only his individual effort, but his family's investment in his education and his potential for future advancement. Parents who sacrifice to pay school fees expect results that justify their expense, while scholarship students face the additional pressure of proving worthy of their benefactors. Support. But as you listen to Thomas struggle through his translation, your mind begins to wander toward concerns that extend beyond the morning's academic challenges. The breakfast porridge, inadequate though it was, has begun to work its way through your system, creating new physical discomforts that will intensify as the morning progresses. Your feet, still cold from the morning's stone floors, have begun to ache in your thin leather shoes. Most troubling of all, you feel the first stirrings of the headache that will inevitably develop as you strain to maintain concentration through the long hours that stretch ahead. The morning's first academic period will continue until 8 o'clock, followed by a brief break, then 2 additional hours of instruction before the midday meal. Already, you find yourself calculating the remaining time: 2 hours until the first break, 4 hours until dinner, 9 hours until the final bell signals the end of formal instruction. Each period will bring its own challenges, its own opportunities for failure, its own demands upon your physical and mental resources. How, you wonder? Do the older boys manage to maintain their focus and energy through this relentless schedule, day after day, month after month? What strategies have they developed to cope with the grinding routine that transforms education from a privilege into a test of endurance? The midday break arrives at 11 o'clock with the welcome sound of the dinner bell, though the relief it promises proves more psychological than physical. After 5 hours of continuous Latin grammar, translation exercises, and recitation, your mind feels as though it has been wrung out like a kitchen cloth. The headache that began as a slight pressure behind your eyes has evolved into a steady throb that seems to pulse in rhythm with your heartbeat. Your stomach, having long since processed the meager breakfast, now announces its emptiness with audible growls that draw disapproving glances from Master Whitmore. The walk from classroom to Great Hall provides the first opportunity since dawn to move freely, though even this brief liberation comes with restrictions. Boys must maintain perfect order as they file through the corridors, their footsteps echoing off stone walls in a rhythm that has remained unchanged since the building's monastic origins. Speaking remains forbidden until students reach their assigned places at the dining tables, a rule enforced by Brother Marcus, who stations himself at strategic points along the route, his birch rod serving as a silent reminder of the consequences of misconduct. The midday meal, termed dinner in accordance with medieval custom, represents the day's most substantial food offering, though the term substantial must be understood within the narrow context of institutional boarding. The main course consists of a thick pottage made from whatever vegetables the school's garden can provide, supplemented by small portions of salt pork or, on fortunate days, fresh meat purchased from local farmers. The pottage, served in the same wooden bowls used for breakfast porridge, varies dramatically in quality depending on the season and the school's current financial condition. During autumn months, when the garden produces its greatest bounty, dinner might include recognizable pieces of cabbage, onions, and turnips swimming in a broth flavored with herbs grown in the small plot behind the kitchen. By winter's end, however, the vegetables have given way to dried legumes, and whatever preserved foods remain in the school's stores. The meat, when present, appears in portions so small that identifying its origin requires careful examination. Boys learn to eat slowly, savoring each bite not from appreciation of flavor, but from the knowledge that no additional food will be forthcoming until evening. The bread served at dinner follows the same economic logic that governs the morning meal. Fresh loaves appear twice weekly, their warm crust and soft interior providing a brief reminder of domestic comfort. On other days, students make do with increasingly stale remnants that require soaking in small beer to become chewable. The beer itself, served at every meal regardless of the students' ages, ranges from acceptable to actively unpleasant, depending on the success of Brother Marcus's brewing efforts. As you eat, you observe the subtle dramas that unfold around the dinner tables. Edmund, the merchant's son who receives regular packages from London, discreetly shares pieces of dried fruit with two younger boys whose loyalty he has carefully cultivated. This generosity serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates his superior social position, creates obligations that may prove useful in future social negotiations, and provides him with a small audience for the stories he tells about life in the capital. The younger boys listen with the intense attention of those who have never traveled beyond their local market towns, their eyes wide as Edmund describes the crowds at Cheapside Market or the grandeur of the Tower of London. At another table, Thomas struggles to maintain his dignity while consuming a meal that clearly fails to satisfy his hunger. His family's resources, sufficient to pay the basic school fees, provide no margin for the additional costs that might make institutional life bearable. He eats with mechanical efficiency, his eyes focused on his bowl to avoid the pitying glances of better supplied classmates. The social dynamics of the dining hall create a complex hierarchy based not just on academic achievement or family status, but on access to supplementary food, clothing, and other comforts that distinguish the genuinely comfortable from those merely maintaining appearances. The meal concludes with the same ritual prayer that marks the end of breakfast. Though the midday prayer includes an additional petition for strength to complete the day's remaining academic challenges, boys rise from their benches with movements that reflect their physical condition after 5 hours of enforced immobility. Some stretch surreptitiously, working out the kinks that develop from sitting on hard wooden benches without back support. Others move with the careful deliberation of those whose bodies have begun to protest the sustained physical discomfort that defines institutional life. The brief period between dinner and the resumption of classes provides the day's only opportunity for what might charitably be called recreation, though the activities available bear little resemblance to the free play that modern children consider normal. Weather permitting, boys may walk in the courtyard under Brother Marcus's supervision, though conversation remains limited and physical activities are restricted to prevent damage to clothing or risk of injury that might interfere with academic performance. Some students use this time to visit the school's small library, housed in what was once the monastery's scriptorium. The collection, consisting of perhaps 50 volumes in Latin and a handful in English, includes classical authors considered essential to a gentleman's education, religious texts deemed appropriate for young minds, and a few contemporary works on rhetoric and moral philosophy. Access to these books provides a marker of serious academic intent, though the privilege comes with strict rules about handling and the requirement to copy passages by hand rather than simply reading for pleasure. The afternoon academic session begins at 1 o'clock with the harsh clang of the study bell. Students file back into the schoolroom with movements that have grown noticeably slower and less precise as the day progresses. The post-meal period presents particular challenges for maintaining attention, as bodies naturally seek rest after eating while minds struggle against the drowsiness that follows physical and mental exhaustion. Master Whitmore, displaying either remarkable stamina or practiced concealment of his own fatigue, launches into the afternoon's first lesson with energy that seems to mock his students' growing lethargy. The subject turns from grammar to composition, as boys are required to construct original Latin sentences, demonstrating proper use of the grammatical principles learned during the morning session. This exercise, while intellectually more engaging than simple recitation, demands a level of mental agility that becomes increasingly difficult to maintain as physical discomfort accumulates. Your attempts to focus on the composition exercise are hindered by a growing catalog of physical complaints that seem to multiply as the day progresses. The breakfast and dinner, inadequate though they were, have begun working their way through your digestive system, creating internal pressure that cannot be relieved until the evening's final break. Your feet, confined in shoes that seemed adequate, this morning now throb with each heartbeat. The wooden bench beneath you has grown harder with each passing hour, creating pressure points that will leave bruises on your thighs and lower back. Most troubling of all is the realization that these discomforts will only intensify as the afternoon continues. The next break will not come until 4 o'clock, followed by an additional hour of instruction before the day's final meal. Evening study period, conducted by candlelight in the increasingly cold schoolroom, will extend until 8 o'clock, making for a total of 12 hours spent in formal academic activity. Only then will students be permitted to return to the dormitory, where the cold stone floors and thin blankets wait to provide their own challenges to restful sleep. As you struggle to construct a sentence demonstrating the proper use of the ablative absolute, your mind begins to drift toward larger questions about the educational system that governs your existence. The adults who designed this routine clearly believe that learning requires discomfort. That knowledge can only be acquired through sustained suffering that builds character along with intellectual capacity. But you begin to wonder whether the physical hardships that define your daily existence actually enhance learning, or merely serve to demonstrate the power that Winnie laughs. Dietesi Riav, that masters hold over their students, the question that increasingly occupies your thoughts as the afternoon stretches ahead is not whether you can endure this routine clearly. Generations of boys before you have survived these same challenges. Rather, you find yourself wondering what kind of men emerge from this system and whether the knowledge gained justifies the price extracted from growing bodies and developing minds. During these crucial years of youth, the inkwell sits before you like a small, dark pool, reflecting the flickering candlelight that illuminates your writing desk in the pre-dawn hours. It is 5:30 in the morning, and while your fellow students still lie sleeping in the dormitory, above, you have risen early to complete the Latin composition that Master Whitmore assigned yesterday evening. The task seems simple enough in its stating: compose 20 lines of verse in the style of Ovid, demonstrating proper use of the elegiac couplet while incorporating vocabulary from the previous week's readings. Yet, as you stare at the blank piece of precious paper, one of only 6 sheets your father provided for the entire term, the magnitude of the challenge becomes increasingly apparent. Your quill pen is crafted from a goose feather and cut according to Brother Marcus's exacting specifications, trembles slightly in your cold fingers. The school's heating consists of a single fireplace in the Great Hall, leaving individual study areas dependent on whatever warmth the massive stone walls can retain from the previous day's activities. The ink, a mixture of oak gall, iron sulfate, and gum arabic prepared weekly by the advanced students, has thickened in the cold to a consistency that requires careful warming between your palms before it will flow properly from the quill's carefully carved tip. The Latin language that surrounds your daily existence like an invisible cage has ceased to feel like mere academic study and has instead become the very atmosphere you breathe within these institutional walls. From the moment you wake to the ringing of the morning bell until you collapse onto your straw mattress at night, virtually every word spoken, written, or heard carries the weight of classical authority. Master Whitmore conducts his lessons entirely in Latin. Brother Marcus offers his corrections and punishments in Latin. And even casual conversation between students is expected to employ the tongue of Caesar and Cicero rather than the comfortable English of home and family. This linguistic immersion, while designed to create fluency through constant practice, has begun to feel less like education than like a form of intellectual imprisonment. Your dreams have started to include Latin conjugations, and you occasionally find yourself thinking through daily problems using grammatical structures that feel foreign to your natural mental processes. The boy who arrived at this school 6 months ago, comfortable in his native English and proud of his ability to read simple texts in the vernacular, has gradually been replaced by someone who struggles to express complex thoughts in any language. With complete confidence, the composition before you requires not merely competence in Latin grammar and vocabulary, but genuine understanding of poetic meter, classical mythology, and the subtle stylistic distinctions that separate elegant verse from mere functional communication. Ovid's Metamorphoses, the text from which you must draw inspiration, presents a labyrinthine world of God's heroes and magical transformations that seems to bear no relationship to the practical concerns of 16th century English life. Yet, Master Whitmore insists that mastery of such classical literature represents the foundation of all genuine learning, the prerequisite for any man who aspires to advancement in law, government, or the church. Your first attempts at composition reveal the inadequacy of your preparation despite months of intensive study. The elegiac couplet, consisting of a dactylic hexameter line followed by a dactylic pentameter, demands not only precise understanding of syllable quantities, but also an intuitive feel for the rhythmic patterns that made classical poetry memorable to ancient audiences. Each line must scan correctly according to rules that seem to shift depending on the poet, the period, and the specific context within a larger work. A single misplaced syllable can destroy the entire meter, while even correctly scanned lines may fail to achieve the elegant flow that distinguishes competent verse from true poetry. The vocabulary requirements present their own formidable challenges. Master Whitmore has specified that your composition must incorporate at least 15 words from this week's readings in Ovid, demonstrating not merely recognition of their meanings, but proper understanding of their grammatical functions and stylistic appropriateness. Some of these words terms, like metamorphosis, numen, and fatum, carry complex theological and philosophical implications that extend far beyond their simple dictionary definitions. Others represent technical vocabulary related to astronomy, geography, or natural philosophy that requires familiarity with classical scientific concepts now considered obsolete. As you begin your first tentative lines, describing the transformation of Daphne into a laurel tree to escape Apollo's unwanted pursuit, the technical demands of the exercise threaten to overwhelm any artistic impulses you might possess. Each word choice must satisfy multiple criteria simultaneously: grammatical correctness, metrical appropriateness, stylistic elegance, and thematic relevance to the assigned topic. The process resembles solving a complex mathematical equation more than creating literature, requiring you to juggle numerous variables while maintaining the illusion of natural flowing expression. The candle that provides your only illumination burns lower as you struggle through your composition, its flickering light casting dancing shadows across the page that make accurate writing increasingly difficult. The school provides each student with a single candle per week for private study, with additional illumination available only for those whose families can afford to purchase supplies from local merchants. You have learned to ration your light carefully, saving the precious flame for only the most demanding assignments while relying on firelight from the Great Hall or natural daylight, streaming through narrow windows for routine reading and memorization. The physical act of writing presents its own challenges in this institutional environment. The desk at which you work, carved from oak and scarred by generations of previous students, provides an uneven surface that requires constant adjustment of paper position to achieve legible results. The quill pen, while more flexible than modern writing instruments, demands careful pressure and angle to prevent the ink from spreading or the point from catching on the rough paper surface. Your hand already cramped from yesterday's extensive copying exercises protests against the continued fine motor control required for neat, readable script. The paper itself represents a significant financial investment that cannot be wasted on false starts or extensive corrections. Each sheet, imported from mills in France or the Low Countries, costs nearly as much as a day's food allowance for a grammar school student. Mistakes cannot be simply discarded and replaced. Instead, they must be carefully scraped away with a thin knife blade, a process that often weakens the paper and creates rough patches that interfere with subsequent writing. The pressure to produce acceptable work on the first attempt adds an additional layer of stress to assignments that would be challenging enough under ideal circumstances. As you work through the technical requirements of your composition, your mind begins to drift toward the larger questions raised by this intensive focus on classical languages and literature. The adults who designed your curriculum clearly believe that Latin provides access to wisdom and culture unavailable in vernacular languages. That familiarity with classical authors represents the mark of an educated gentleman, and that the mental discipline required to master ancient languages will prove valuable in whatever career you eventually pursue. Yet you find yourself wondering whether this extensive investment in linguistic archaeology serves any practical purpose in a world where most business, law, and government is conducted in English. The morning bell will ring in 30 minutes, summoning you to prime and the beginning of another day filled with grammatical exercises, translation assignments, and recitation requirements. Your composition remains unfinished, a source of anxiety that will shadow your thoughts throughout the morning's lessons. The incomplete verses mock your efforts, their irregular meter and awkward phrasing serving as evidence of your continued inadequacy in the face of classical perfection. But perhaps more troubling than any specific academic failure is the growing realization that this struggle with Latin composition represents just one small component of an educational system designed to test endurance as much as intelligence. The boy who can survive the daily grinding routine of grammatical analysis, textual memorization, and stylistic imitation will presumably emerge as an adult capable of handling whatever intellectual challenges his profession might require. Yet you begin to wonder whether this educational philosophy sacrifices too much individual creativity and natural curiosity on the altar of classical conformity. What becomes of boys who cannot adapt to this linguistic environment? You wonder. And what kinds of men emerge from those who can? The morning's first Latin lesson begins with the ritual that has opened every academic day since your arrival at the school 6 months ago. Master Whitmore, his black woolen gown rustling as he ascends the raised platform at the classroom's front, surveys the assembled students with eyes that seem to catalog every sign of insufficient preparation or wandering attention. His first words spoken in the precise ecclesiastical Latin that echoes his monastic training call for the recitation of yesterday's assigned passage from Virgil's Aeneid 50. Lines of epic poetry that students were expected to memorize perfectly, complete with proper pronunciation, correct emphasis, and understanding of every grammatical construction. You rise with your classmates as Master Whitmore calls for volunteers to begin the recitation, though the term volunteer applies only in the most technical sense. Students who fail to offer themselves for early recitation inevitably find themselves called upon later, when fatigue and accumulated anxiety make success less likely and punishment more severe. The older boys, experienced in the tactical aspects of classroom survival, compete quietly for the opportunity to demonstrate their preparation while it remains fresh in their minds and their voices remain strong. Thomas, the cloth merchant's son who sleeps in the dormitory space beside you, steps forward with the mixture of confidence and trepidation that characterizes all public performance in this environment. His voice, still carrying traces of his Yorkshire accent, despite months of correction by Master Whitmore, begins the familiar opening of Book 4. At Regina Gravi eum dudum sacia, cura... The Latin words flow with practiced smoothness, though you notice the slight tremor that betrays his nervousness as he approaches. The more challenging passages that follow. The recitation serves multiple pedagogical purposes beyond simple demonstration of memorization skills. Master Whitmore interrupts Thomas frequently to demand explanation of grammatical constructions, the function of the ablative absolute in line 12. The reason for the subjunctive mood in line 18, the literary significance of the metaphorical language in line 23. These interruptions, while ostensibly designed to test comprehension, also serve to maintain tension throughout the recitation process, ensuring that no student can relax into simple rote repetition without genuine understanding of the text's meaning and structure. As Thomas struggles through Virgil's complex description of Dido's growing passion for Aeneas, you find your own attention divided between his performance and your continuing anxiety about the unfinished composition that lies hidden in your desk. The 20 lines of elegiac verse that seemed manageable yesterday evening have proven remarkably resistant to completion. Despite your pre-dawn efforts and the sacrifice of precious candle wax, each attempted couplet reveals new grammatical pitfalls or metrical irregularities that require extensive revision, creating a cascade of corrections that threaten to consume far more time than the assignment should reasonably demand. The technical challenges of writing classical Latin poetry, you have discovered, extend far beyond simple vocabulary and grammar into areas of cultural knowledge that seem almost impossibly vast for a 16-year-old English boy to master. Ovid's casual references to obscure mythological figures, ancient geographical locations, and classical philosophical concepts assume familiarity with an entire intellectual world that exists primarily in the pages of other Latin texts. Creating even simple verses in his style requires not merely linguistic competence, but genuine immersion in the mental universe of ancient Rome, complete with its gods, customs, and ways of understanding human experience. Master Whitmore's corrections to Thomas's recitation provide a running commentary on the subtleties of classical Latin that highlight the inadequacies of your own preparation. The distinction between come with the indicative and come with the subjunctive, seemingly arbitrary to English-speaking students, carries implications about causation, temporality, and narrative perspective that requires sophisticated understanding of Roman rhetorical theory. The proper pronunciation of diphthongs, which varies depending on the period of Latin being studied and the regional origin of the particular author, demands attention to historical linguistic development that would challenge university-trained scholars. The classroom atmosphere during these extended recitation sessions takes on the quality of a judicial proceeding, with Master Whitmore serving as both judge and prosecutor, while students alternate between the roles of defendant and anxious observer. Every error, whether in pronunciation, meter, or comprehension, receives immediate correction accompanied by explanation of the underlying principle that has been violated. Serious mistakes, particularly those that suggest inadequate study rather than simple confusion, result in the application of the birch rod that rests constantly within Master Whitmore's reach. The physical punishment that accompanies academic failure serves purposes that extend beyond simple deterrence of future errors. The public nature of the beating, administered before the assembled class while the offending student bends over Master Whitmore's desk, creates an atmosphere of shared vulnerability that binds students together in common apprehension, while simultaneously reinforcing the absolute authority of institutional discipline. Boys learn to fear not only the physical pain of the rod, but the humiliation of public failure and the loss of standing among their peers that accompanies demonstrated inadequacy. As Thomas concludes his recitation with obvious relief, Master Whitmore begins the day's formal lesson on Latin syntax, focusing on the uses of the gerund and gerundive that have been causing confusion among even the most advanced students. The lesson unfolds according to the pedagogical method that governs all instruction in grammar schools: presentation of rules, illustration through classical examples, and immediate application through student exercises designed to test comprehension and reinforce proper usage. The gerund, Master Whitmore explains with the patient precision of someone who has delivered this same lesson hundreds of times, functions as a verbal noun that allows Latin writers to express action concepts in substantive form. The gerundive, superficially similar but functionally distinct, serves as a passive participle expressing necessity or obligation. The distinction, crucial for accurate translation and composition, requires students to analyze not merely the form of individual words, but their syntactic relationships within complex sentence structures that may extend across multiple lines of text. The classical examples that illustrate these grammatical principles come primarily from Cicero's orations, texts that present their own formidable challenges for student comprehension. Cicero's elaborate periodic sentences, with their suspended main verbs and multiple layers of subordinate clauses, create labyrinthine structures that require careful analysis to untangle. Students must identify not only the grammatical function of each word and phrase, but also the rhetorical purpose served by particular constructions within the broader context of forensic or political argumentation. As Master Whitmore works through a particularly complex passage from the first Catiline oration, you find yourself struggling to maintain focus on the grammatical analysis while your mind continues to worry about the unfinished composition. The elegiac couplets that seemed merely challenging yesterday now appear almost impossible to complete within the time remaining before the assignment's deadline. Each line requires not only technical correctness, but also some degree of literary merit, a standard that seems to recede further from your grasp with each attempted revision. The other students around you display varying degrees of engagement with the morning's lesson, their faces reflecting the complex mixture of intellectual effort and physical discomfort that characterizes extended academic sessions. Edmund, the London merchant's son, whose superior resources allow him access to additional tutoring, follows Master Whitmore's explanations with apparent ease, occasionally nodding to indicate understanding of particularly subtle points. William, whose family's limited means provide no margin for educational supplements, maintains the expression of determined concentration that masks his struggle to keep pace with material that assumes preparation he has not received. The wooden benches on which students sit during these extended lessons have grown increasingly uncomfortable as the morning progresses, creating pressure points that distract attention from academic content toward physical concerns. Your lower back aches from the sustained effort to maintain proper posture, while your feet have begun to lose sensation from the pressure of the hard floor against your thin-soled shoes. The schoolroom's stone walls, which help maintain cool temperatures during summer months, conduct cold from the winter air outside, creating a chill that penetrates woolen clothing and makes extended sitting increasingly uncomfortable. As the lesson continues through its second hour, Master Whitmore assigns individual exercises designed to test student mastery of gerund and gerundive constructions. Each boy must construct original sentences demonstrating proper usage while avoiding the common errors that have plagued previous attempts at similar assignments. The exercise requires simultaneous attention to grammatical correctness, stylistic appropriateness, and semantic coherence, combination of skills that pushes most students near the limits of their capabilities. Your turn approaches with inevitable certainty, bringing with it the familiar mixture of anxiety and determination that accompanies all public performance in this environment. The sentence you have been constructing mentally tempting to describe the necessity of studying Latin through appropriate use of the gerundive seems adequate in your mind, but may reveal unexpected flaws when subjected to Master Whitmore's scrutiny. The gap between private understanding and public demonstration has proven treacherous territory for even the most prepared students. But as you prepare to stand and deliver your sentence, a more fundamental question begins to form in your mind. What is the ultimate purpose of this intensive focus on grammatical precision and classical literary style? The adults who designed this curriculum clearly believe that mastery of Latin syntax provides essential intellectual training. Yet you find yourself wondering whether the countless hours spent parsing ancient texts might be better invested in subjects more directly, relevant to the practical challenges that await beyond these walls. The afternoon composition period arrives with the awaited inevitability of an approaching thunderstorm, bringing with it the accumulated pressure of 12 hours spent wrestling with Latin syntax, vocabulary, and the increasingly complex demands of classical literary style. Master Whitmore distributes writing materials with ceremonial precision quill pens freshly cut to his specifications, small pots of carefully prepared ink, and precious sheets of paper that represent not merely writing services, but significant financial investments that cannot be wasted on false starts or extensive corrections. Your unfinished elegiac composition lies before you like an accusation, its incomplete couplets mocking 6 hours of pre-dawn effort and the sacrifice of precious candle wax. The 20 lines that seemed manageable when first assigned have proven remarkably resistant to completion, each attempted verse revealing new grammatical pitfalls, metrical irregularities, or stylistic inadequacies that require extensive revision. The approaching deadline creates a pressure that transforms what should be a creative exercise into a desperate struggle against time, technical limitations, and the growing awareness of your own inadequacy in the face of classical perfection. The assignment itself: compose verses in the style of Ovid, while demonstrating mastery of elegiac meter and incorporating vocabulary from recent readings. Readings represents the culmination of months spent analyzing the metamorphoses line by line, parsing complex grammatical constructions, and memorizing passages that seem to bear no relationship to practical human concerns. Yet now, faced with the necessity of creating rather than simply analyzing classical literature, you discover that passive familiarity with Ovid's techniques provides little guidance for active composition in his style. The elegiac couplet, consisting of a dactylic hexameter followed by a dactylic pentameter, demands not only precise understanding of syllable quantities, but also an intuitive feel for the rhythmic patterns that made classical poetry memorable to ancient audiences. Each syllable must be classified as long or short according to rules that seem to shift depending on the specific word, its position within the line, and its relationship to surrounding vowels and consonants. A single misplaced quantity can destroy the entire meter, while even correctly scanned lines may fail to achieve the elegant flow that mute scant, ruby kiss. Only Ruby Kiss has the luxurious texture that glides on weave. Meat scant, meat. And lives are meat. Meat scant K's, meat. Mute scant K'd, meat scant, meat. While me K, meat, me meat. Meat, why? Meets K. I say, meat K'd. With sem as, we is sent, but we are lies. We are to me kai sits on sagoit. I will Italy look at K to sec I per me to wit it to me secri said I lobes kasitic yet sit I read to tit you buy it sit up we duck lit up did be he did he see the bonus it distinguishes competent verse from true poetry. The vocabulary requirements present equally formidable challenges. Master Whitmore has specified that your composition must incorporate at least 15 words from this week's readings, demonstrating not merely recognition of their meanings, but proper understanding of their grammatical functions and stylistic appropriateness. Words like numen, fatum, and metamorphosis carry complex theological and philosophical implications that extend far beyond their simple dictionary definitions. while technical terms related to astronomy, geography, and natural philosophy require familiarity with classical scientific concepts now considered obsolete around you. Fellow students struggle with their own compositions, their faces reflecting the mixture of concentration and desperation that characterizes academic work, performed under time pressure. Thomas, whose morning recitation earned grudging approval from Master Whitmore, now wrestles with a description of Narcissus gazing at his reflection, his frequent erasures and corrections, creating rough patches on the expensive paper that interfere with smooth pen strokes. Edmund, despite his superior resources and additional tutoring, displays signs of the same frustration that affects less privileged students when confronted with the practical demands of classical composition. The physical environment adds its own complications to the already challenging intellectual task. The afternoon light, filtered through narrow windows designed more for defense than illumination, creates uneven patterns of brightness and shadow across individual desks that makes careful writing increasingly difficult as the sun moves across the sky. The cold stone walls that maintain cool temperatures during summer months now conduct chill from the winter air outside, creating conditions that make extended fine motor control increasingly challenging for fingers already cramped from morning. Writing exercises, Master Whitmore patrols the aisles between student desks like a predatory bird, his sharp eyes scanning compositions in progress for signs of inadequate preparation, grammatical errors, or stylistic failures that will require correction. His presence creates an additional layer of pressure that transforms private struggle into public performance, making it impossible to work through problems at a natural pace or experiment with different approaches to challenging passages. Students learn to conceal their difficulties behind expressions of focused concentration, though experienced observers can easily identify those approaching panic through subtle signs of physical tension and increasingly desperate corrections. The time pressure inherent in all classroom composition exercises serves pedagogical purposes that extend beyond simple efficiency. Students must demonstrate not only their knowledge of Latin grammar and vocabulary, but also their ability to access and apply that knowledge under conditions that simulate the practical demands of professional life. Lawyers arguing cases in court, clergymen delivering sermons, and government officials drafting important documents all work within time, constraints that require immediate access to extensive linguistic resources. The grammar school environment, by creating artificial urgency around academic tasks, prepares students for similar pressures in their future careers. As you work through your own composition, describing Daphne's transformation into a laurel tree, while incorporating the required vocabulary and maintaining proper elegiac meter, the technical demands of the exercise begin to overwhelm any literary aspirations you might have possessed. Each word choice must satisfy multiple criteria simultaneously: grammatical correctness, metrical appropriateness, stylistic elegance, and thematic relevance to the assigned topic. The process resembles solving a complex mathematical equation more than creating literature, requiring you to juggle numerous variables while maintaining the illusion of natural flowing expression, the mythology that provides the subject matter. For your composition presents its own complications for a 16-year-old English boy attempting to enter imaginatively into the mental world of ancient Rome. Ovid's casual references to obscure deities, arcane religious practices, and classical philosophical concepts assume familiarity with an entire cultural universe that exists primarily in the pages of other Latin texts. Writing convincingly about Apollo's pursuit of Daphne requires not merely understanding of the surface narrative, but genuine appreciation for the theological and artistic implications that made such stories meaningful to Roman audiences. The approaching deadline creates an urgency that forces compromise between perfectionist ambitions and practical necessity. Lines that remain metrically imperfect must be accepted if time does not permit further revision, while vocabulary choices, dictated more by convenience than artistic appropriateness, become inevitable as the composition period draws toward its close. The result, you know even as you write, will satisfy the minimum requirements of the assignment, while falling far short of the classical elegance that represents the true goal of humanistic education. Master, Whitmore's announcement that 5 minutes remain before collection sends a visible wave of tension through the classroom as students make final desperate corrections and additions to their compositions. Quill pens scratch frantically across paper surfaces, creating the sound of intellectual urgency that characterizes academic institutions throughout the Christian world. Boys who have spent hours crafting individual lines now find themselves racing to complete final couplets that may determine their academic standing for the remainder of the term, as you add the final words to your 20th line. Completing the minimum length requirement while leaving numerous stylistic concerns unresolved, you find yourself reflecting on the broader implications of this intensive focus on classical languages and literature. The hours spent mastering Latin syntax, memorizing ancient poetry, and struggling to compose in styles perfected to millennia ago represent an enormous investment of time and intellectual energy that might alternatively be directed toward subjects more immediately relevant to contemporary concerns. Yet the adults who design this curriculum clearly believe that engagement with classical literature provides something essential that cannot be gained through study of vernacular texts or contemporary authors. Perhaps the mental discipline required to master ancient languages creates intellectual flexibility valuable in any field of endeavor. Perhaps familiarity with classical culture provides access to wisdom and beauty unavailable in more recent literature. Or perhaps the difficulty itself serves an important function, testing students' capacity for sustained intellectual effort and separating those capable of advanced study from those better suited to practical trades. The collection of completed compositions marks the end of another stage in your ongoing negotiation with the demands of classical education. But it also raises questions that extend beyond any particular assignment or academic term. What kind of men emerge from this system of intensive linguistic training, and how well does their education prepare them for the practical challenges that await in professions, government, and family life? The answer, you suspect, may depend as much on individual character and circumstances as on the specific content of classical curriculum. But as master, Whitmore gathers the completed papers with movements that suggest he will spend his evening hours evaluating not merely grammatical correctness, but the deeper question of which students possess the intellectual capacity and personal determination to benefit from continued humanistic education. You realize that the true test lies not in any single composition, but in your ability to sustain effort and maintain curiosity despite the grinding daily routine that transforms learning from pleasure into endurance. The dormitory that has become your world for 12 hours of every day stretches before you in the pale light of dawn. A cavern of stone and shadows that houses 47 boys ranging in age from 7 to 17. The room itself, originally constructed as part of a Benedictine monastery before the recent dissolution, retains the austere functionality of its religious origin. 60 feet in length, 20 feet in width, with walls of local limestone that seem to absorb warmth during the day only to release cold during the long winter nights. Above your head, the vaulted ceiling disappears into darkness that even the single oil lamp burning at the room's far end cannot penetrate, creating a sense of vast emptiness that dwarfs the human figures scattered across the floor below. Your sleeping space consists of a straw mattress measuring 4 feet by 6 feet, laid directly upon wooden planks that rest on stone supports elevated just enough from the floor to discourage the mice that nonetheless manage to share your quarters. The mattress, which you are fortunate not to share, thanks to your father's ability to pay the additional fee for individual bedding, has compressed over months of use into a thin layer of straw that provides minimal cushioning against the unforgiving boards beneath. The straw itself replaced twice yearly if the school's budget allows. Carries the musty smell of dampness and decay that permeates everything in this environment. Where evicted ventilation remains an impossible luxury, the single woolen blanket that provides your only protection against the bitter English winter measures perhaps 5 feet in length and 4 feet in width. Dimensions that require careful positioning to cover either your torso or your legs completely, but never both simultaneously. The wool, coarse and undyed, scratches against exposed skin and carries the distinct odor of the sheep from which it came, mixed with accumulated human sweat and the general mustiness that characterizes all textiles in this perpetually damp environment. During the coldest nights, boys often sleep in their day clothes, doublets, hose, and even shoes, trading comfort for the minimal additional warmth that extra layers might provide. Thomas, who sleeps on the mattress next to yours, has arranged his bedding with the precise efficiency of someone who has learned to maximize every available comfort within severe constraints. His blanket, slightly larger than yours thanks to a mother's careful selection, is folded and positioned to create multiple layers over his chest and shoulders while leaving his legs exposed to the cold stone air. His pillow, if the rolled-up cloak that supports his head can be dignified with such a term, has been positioned to create a slight elevation that prevents the persistent cough that affects many students during the winter months when dampness combines with cold to create conditions that challenge even healthy constitutions. The social geography of the dormitory reflects the complex hierarchies that govern every aspect of institutional life, with sleeping positions assigned according to factors that include family, wealth, academic achievement, length of attendance, and the subtle negotiations that characterize adolescent social dynamics. The most desirable locations near the single oil lamp and farthest from the drafty staircases are claimed by older boys whose seniority grants them privileges unavailable to newer arrivals. The least favorable spots, directly beneath windows that let in cold air or adjacent to the night stairs where late arrivals might disturb sleep. House the youngest students and those whose families lack the resources or influence to secure better accommodations. Edmund, the London merchant's son, whose superior resources affect every aspect of his school experience, has somehow managed to secure a corner position that provides protection from drafts on 2 sides while remaining close enough to the lamp to permit limited reading after the official end of the school day. His mattress, noticeably thicker than those provided to other students, suggests either superior initial quality or access to additional straw through means unavailable to less privileged classmates. His pillow, an actual feather bolster rather than improvised bedding, marks him as distinctly different from boys whose families view such luxuries as unnecessary expenses. The morning routine begins in darkness with the harsh clang of the wake-up bell, a sound that reverberates off stone walls and vaulted ceiling to create echoes that seem to multiply the noise far beyond what a single bell should reasonably produce. The transition from sleep to wakefulness occurs not gradually, but with jarring suddenness, as boys emerge from whatever rest they have managed to achieve on their inadequate bedding to face another day of physical discomfort and academic challenge. The darkness that still fills the dormitory at this early hour requires navigation by touch and sound. As students feel their way to personal belongings while trying not to disturb neighbors who might be attempting to steal a few additional moments of unconsciousness, the first order of business involves what the school euphemistically terms morning ablutions, though the facilities provided for such activities bear little resemblance to the washing arrangements that boys might have known in their family homes. Water comes from a large wooden barrel filled daily from the school's well and positioned at the dormitory's near end, though by morning the surface usually bears a thin skin of ice that must be broken before the liquid beneath can be accessed. Each boy possesses a wooden bowl for washing, along with a small piece of lye soap that must last an entire month if family resources cannot stretch to frequent replacements. The washing process itself reveals the practical challenges of maintaining personal hygiene within institutional constraints designed more for efficiency than comfort. The water, even when not frozen, carries the mineral taste of the local well, along with whatever impurities have accumulated. During its storage in wooden containers that are cleaned infrequently and inadequately, the soap, harsh enough to remove dirt and accumulated perspiration, also strips natural oils from skin already dried by constant exposure to cold stone walls and inadequately heated air. The result leaves boys clean by institutional standards while creating the chronic skin problems that affect most students: cracked hands, irritated faces, and the persistent rash that develops where coarse woolen clothing rubs against insufficiently. Moisturized skin, the dormitory's sanitary arrangements, present challenges that extend beyond simple inconvenience into areas that directly affect student health and academic performance. The chamber pots provided for nighttime necessity are shared among groups of 4 boys, creating obvious problems of hygiene and privacy that would be difficult to manage even under ideal circumstances. The pots themselves, crude earthenware vessels without lids, contribute to the complex olfactory environment that characterizes the dormitory throughout the night. During winter months, when windows remain closed against the cold, the accumulated odors of 47 adolescent boys, inadequate washing facilities, and primitive sanitary arrangements create an atmosphere that new students find almost unbearable. The morning routine continues with the complex process of bed making, though this term applies only in the most technical sense to the arrangement of straw mattresses and thin blankets that constitute student sleeping equipment. Master Whitmore's regulations require that all bedding be folded according to precise specifications, with mattresses arranged in perfect rows and personal belongings stowed in individual wooden chests that serve the dual functions of storage and seating. The inspection that follows each morning's preparation provides opportunity for punishment of boys whose arrangements fail to meet institutional standards, creating additional pressure around activities that should represent the day's most private and personal moments. The wooden chests that contain students' personal possessions reveal the stark differences in family circumstances that affect every aspect of school life despite institutional attempts to create equality through shared hardship. Your own chest, crafted by a local carpenter according to your father's specifications, includes a hinged lid, iron fittings, and a lock that provides some security for valuable items. The interior, lined with rough cloth and divided into compartments, holds your spare clothing, writing materials, the few personal items permitted by school regulations, and the small store of food that helps supplement the inadequate institutional meals. Thomas's chest, while functional, lacks the refinements that mark superior craftsmanship and greater family investment in student comfort. His possessions, carefully arranged to maximize the available space, include fewer changes of clothing, cheaper writing materials, and virtually no supplementary food beyond what the school provides. The contrast between his arrangements and those of Edmund, whose elaborately fitted chest contains luxury items that most students can only imagine, provides a daily reminder of the social differences that education is supposedly designed to transcend but often serves to reinforce, as you complete the morning preparations that will allow you to face another day of academic challenge and physical discomfort. Your attention inevitably turns to the evening that lies 12 hours in the future, when you will return to this same stone chamber to attempt another night's rest on the same inadequate bedding. The prospect weighs heavily on a mind already occupied with concerns about unfinished assignments, approaching examinations, and the hundred small discomforts that accumulate throughout each institutional day. The dormitory environment, with its combination of cold stone walls, insufficient bedding, primitive sanitary facilities, and constant proximity to dozens of other boys, represents more than simple accommodation. It embodies a philosophy of education that views physical hardship as essential preparation for adult responsibilities. The boys who can adapt to these conditions while maintaining academic performance, presumably, develop the resilience and determination that will serve them in whatever careers await beyond these walls. Yet, as you join the stream of students filing toward the chapel for morning prayers, you find yourself wondering whether the educational benefits of institutional hardship justify the physical and emotional costs imposed on developing adolescents during years when comfort and security might better serve the cause of intellectual development. The question follows you through the cold corridors like a shadow, unresolved and perhaps unanswerable within the confines of a system that has shaped young men according to these same principles for countless generations. The great hall that serves as dining room, assembly space, and evening study area embodies the institutional philosophy that governs every aspect of your daily existence: function over comfort, efficiency over individual preference, and communal discipline over personal choice. Originally constructed as the monastery's refectory, the room retains the austere grandeur of its religious origins while adapting somewhat awkwardly to the practical needs of a grammar school housing nearly 50 adolescent boys. The limestone walls, rising 20 feet to support a timber roof blackened by decades of smoke from inadequate fireplaces, create an acoustic environment where every sound conversation, coughing, the scrape of wooden benches against stone floors echoes and multiplies, until the accumulated noise becomes a constant presence that makes concentration difficult and privacy impossible. The dining tables themselves tell the story of institutional life through their scarred wooden surfaces, marked by countless knife cuts, ink stains, and the carved initials of homesick boys attempting to leave some permanent record of their temporary existence in this place. Each table, measuring 12 feet in length and 3 feet in width, accommodates 20 students seated on backless wooden benches that provide no relief for spines already stressed by long hours of study and inadequate sleep. The arrangement forces boys into close physical proximity that eliminates personal space while creating the conditions for rapid transmission of whatever illnesses might enter the school community. Your assigned position at the third table reflects the complex social calculations that determine seating arrangements throughout the institution. The head table, reserved for the most academically distinguished and longest tenured students, enjoys several privileges that mark its occupants as superior to their younger colleagues. First, access to food when meals are served, freedom from certain disciplinary restrictions, and the right to leave the hall before others when meals conclude. The final table, closest to the kitchen and farthest from the warming fireplace, houses the newest arrivals and those whose academic performance or family circumstances mark them as least deserving of institutional consideration. The serving process itself reveals the practical challenges of feeding 50 growing boys with limited resources and minimal kitchen staff. Food arrives from the kitchen in large wooden bowls that must be passed from hand to hand along each table, a system that ensures the boys seated closest to the serving end receive the choicest portions, while those at the far ends make do with whatever remains after 48 others have been served. The portions, adequate by institutional standards, but inadequate by any measure of adolescent appetite, are carefully calculated to provide sufficient nutrition for survival while avoiding the expense of genuine satisfaction. Brother Marcus, who oversees all dining activities from his position at the head table, maintains order through a combination of religious ritual and disciplinary threat that transforms each meal into a lesson in obedience and self-control. Meals begin and end with Latin prayers that students recite in unison, their voices creating a monotonous drone that fills the stone chamber while reinforcing the religious character of institutional life. During the meal itself, conversation is forbidden, replaced by readings from religious texts that provide moral instruction while ensuring that eating occurs in silence and at the pace dictated by institutional efficiency rather than individual appetite. The food itself reflects Both the seasonal limitations of 16th century agriculture and the economic constraints that govern institutional purchasing decisions. Breakfast porridge, served in wooden bowls that retain the flavors of countless previous meals despite regular scrubbing, consists primarily of oats, stretched with barley and flavored with whatever vegetables the school's garden can provide. During autumn harvest, you might discover recognizable pieces of turnip, parsnip, or cabbage floating in the thin gruel. By winter's end, the vegetables have given way to dried peas that add texture, if not flavor, to the increasingly monotonous mixture. The bread that accompanies every meal provides its own lessons in institutional economy and the relationship between cost and quality. Delivered twice weekly from the village bakery, the loaves arrive fresh and warm on Monday and Thursday mornings. Their soft crust and dense interior providing brief reminders of domestic comfort and maternal care. By Wednesday and Saturday, however, the bread has achieved a hardness that requires soaking in small beer before it becomes chewable. While the flavor has evolved from pleasant to merely tolerable to actively unpleasant as staleness combines with whatever dampness the storage rooms can provide. The small beer served at every meal, regardless of student age, carries its own complex history of brewing, storage, and gradual deterioration that affects both taste and nutritional value. Brother Marcus, who oversees the brewing process in cellars beneath the kitchen, follows recipes inherited from the monastery's original inhabitants. Though his success varies dramatically depending on the quality of ingredients available, the seasonal temperature variations that affect fermentation, and his own attention to timing and technique, the result ranges from acceptably mild beverage to actively unpleasant liquid that students consume only because no alternatives are provided. And dehydration presents worse problems than bad beer. The evening meal, termed supper according to medieval custom, provides the day's most substantial food offering, though the term substantial must be understood within the narrow context of institutional boarding. The main course typically consists of thick pottage made from whatever vegetables remain in storage, supplemented by small portions of salt pork or, on fortunate occasions, fresh meat purchased from local farmers when the school's budget permits such luxury. The pottage, served in the same wooden bowls used for breakfast porridge, varies dramatically in quality depending on seasonal availability and the cook's skill in combining limited ingredients into something approaching palatability. During the brief autumn harvest season, supper might include recognizable vegetables prepared in ways that recall domestic cooking: onions sautéed in bacon fat, cabbage boiled with herbs from the school garden, or turnips roasted over the kitchen fire until their surfaces caramelize slightly. These meals, while hardly luxurious, provide sufficient variety and flavor to satisfy adolescent appetites while creating positive associations with institutional life that help boys endure the more challenging periods that inevitably follow. Winter meals present entirely different challenges as fresh vegetables disappear and the school's food stores are reduced to preserved items that may have been adequate when first prepared but deteriorate steadily throughout the cold months. Salt pork, the staple protein for most winter meals, arrives in barrels where it has been packed in brine that preserves the meat, while making it so salty that multiple soakings are required before it becomes edible. The soaking process, conducted in the same kitchen facilities used for general food preparation, adds time and complexity to cooking while creating additional opportunities for contamination or spoilage that affects the entire meal. The social dynamics that unfold during meals provide insight into the complex hierarchies that govern student life despite institutional attempts to create equality. Through shared hardship, boys from wealthy families often receive packages from home containing dried fruits, nuts, or preserved meats that they may share were not according to personal inclination and strategic social calculations. These supplementary foods serve as currency in the underground economy of student relationships. traded for assistance with difficult assignments, protection from older boys' bullying, or simply the comfort of companionship during long winter evenings. Thomas, whose father's cloth business provides adequate income for school fees but little margin for luxuries, watches with carefully concealed envy as Edmund discreetly distributes pieces of dried apple to selected friends at the neighboring table. The transaction, conducted through subtle gestures designed to avoid Brother Marcus's attention, creates temporary alliances while reinforcing social distinctions based on family wealth rather than individual merit or academic achievement. Thomas's exclusion from such exchanges serves as a daily reminder that institutional equality remains largely theoretical when family resources continue to affect student experience in fundamental ways. The physical environment of the Great Hall adds its own challenges to the already complex social dynamics of communal dining. The single fireplace, massive enough to heat a domestic residence, but inadequate for a space of this size, creates zones of relative warmth and cold that affect seating preferences and student comfort throughout the meal. Boys seated near the fire enjoy temperatures that make eating pleasant, while those at the room's far end huddle over their food in conditions that make extended sitting increasingly uncomfortable as autumn gives way to winter. The stone floors, practical for cleaning but problematic for warmth retention, conduct cold from the outside walls throughout the room, creating conditions that make extended sitting on backless benches increasingly uncomfortable as meals progress. Your feet, already cold from the morning's activities in unheated classrooms, gradually lose sensation during the 30-minute evening meal, while your back protests against the sustained effort required to maintain proper posture without support. The accumulated discomfort affects not only physical well-being, but also the ability to maintain focus on the religious readings that accompany every meal. As supper concludes with the familiar Latin prayers that mark the end of institutional feeding, you find yourself calculating the hours until the next meal, while simultaneously dreading the return to the cold dormitory where inadequate bedding and primitive facilities await. The Great Hall, for all its discomforts and social tensions, at least provides the warmth of human community and the distraction of shared activity. The dormitory offers only the cold companionship of stone walls and the private struggle to achieve rest sufficient for another day's academic and physical challenges. The evening study period that follows supper transforms the Great Hall into a different kind of institutional space, though one no more comfortable than its dining incarnation. Tables are cleared of eating utensils and food debris to make room for books, papers, and the various academic materials that students require for completing daily assignments. The transition from dining to study occurs without any opportunity for students to address the physical need-stretching cramped muscles, visiting sanitary facilities, or simply moving freely that have accumulated during the prolonged meal. What strikes you most forcefully as you arrange your books and papers for the evening's work is not the inadequacy of any particular aspect of institutional life, but the cumulative effect of countless small discomforts that combine to create an environment where simple physical existence requires constant attention and energy that might otherwise be directed toward intellectual pursuits. The question that increasingly occupies your thoughts is whether this systematic discomfort serves any educational purpose beyond teaching endurance, and whether boys might not learn their Latin grammar just as effectively in circumstances that allowed greater attention to academic rather than survival concerns. The evening study period begins at 7 o'clock with the lighting of candles that transform the Great Hall into a cavern of flickering shadows and golden pools of light, illuminating a small circle of boys hunched over their books and writing materials. The transition from dining space to academic workspace occurs without any meaningful break, as tables are simply cleared of food, debris, and dining implements to make room for the educational materials that will occupy the next 2 hours. The same hard wooden benches that made eating uncomfortable now present even greater challenges for academic work that requires sustained concentration, careful penmanship, and the kind of focused attention that becomes nearly impossible when basic physical comfort remains unattainable. The candles themselves, distributed according to a strict rationing system that reflects both economic necessity and institutional discipline, provide barely adequate illumination for the demanding academic tasks that students must complete before the day's final bell releases them to whatever rest their inadequate dormitory facilities might provide. Each table receives 4 candles to serve 20 students, creating conditions where boys must position themselves strategically to share light sources while avoiding the shadows cast by their neighbors' bodies and materials. The flickering flames, vulnerable to every draft that penetrates the Great Hall's inadequate window coverings, create constantly shifting patterns of brightness and darkness that make sustained reading or writing a source of eye strain and frustration. Your assigned position at the table center provides access to 2 candle flames, though sharing that illumination with 3 other boys means that turning pages, adjusting papers, or reaching for writing materials requires constant negotiation too. Avoid blocking light sources that others need equally. Thomas, seated to your left, has learned to position his work at an angle that captures reflected light from the candle flame without directly interfering with your own illumination, though the compromise leaves him working in conditions that would be considered inadequate in any domestic setting. The boy to your right, a younger student whose family name you have never learned, struggles with writing exercises that would be challenging even under ideal conditions but become nearly impossible when conducted in insufficient light, while sitting on an uncomfortable bench at a table designed for dining rather than academic work. The academic tasks that must be completed during this evening study period represent the culmination of a day that began before dawn with preliminary preparation for morning classes. Latin grammar exercises require careful attention to complex rules of syntax and word formation that become increasingly difficult to maintain as physical discomfort accumulates and mental fatigue affects concentration. Translation assignments demand not only linguistic competence, but also familiarity with classical, literary, and cultural references that assume knowledge far beyond what most 16-year-old English boys can reasonably be expected to possess. Composition exercises like the elegiac verse that continues to resist your best efforts at completion require simultaneous attention to grammatical correctness, metrical precision, and literary style that pushes most students near the limits of their capabilities even under ideal circumstances. The social dynamics of evening study create their own complications for academic performance, as 47 boys attempting to concentrate in a single large room inevitably generate noise, distraction, and competition for limited resources that make sustained intellectual effort increasingly challenging. The scratch of quill pens against paper, the rustle of pages being turned, and the occasional whispered request for assistance with difficult passages combine to create a constant background of sound that makes concentration difficult for students accustomed to the quieter environments of domestic study. More disruptive are the involuntary sounds: coughing, sneezing, the creak of wooden benches, and the shuffling of feet that remind everyone of the physical presence of dozens of other boys struggling with similar challenges. Brother Marcus patrols the aisles between tables with the vigilance of a shepherd guarding against wolves, his sharp eyes scanning student faces for signs of insufficient effort, inappropriate conversation, or the kind of wandering attention that indicates a boy's mind has drifted from academic concerns toward the numerous distractions that threaten sustained study. His wooden staff, carried more as symbol than practical tool, nonetheless serves as a constant reminder that evening study remains subject to the same disciplinary regime that governs every other aspect of institutional life. Students who fail to maintain proper focus, who whisper questions to neighbors, or who simply appear to be making inadequate progress on their assignments find themselves called forward for individual consultation that inevitably results in additional work or physical correction. The writing materials required for evening study present their own challenges for students attempting to complete assignments under conditions that would test the patience of professional scribes. Quill pens, cut fresh each week according to Master Whitmore's specifications, require constant attention to maintain the sharp points and proper angles essential for legible writing. The cutting process itself, conducted with small knives that must be kept sharp enough for precise work, presents opportunities for injury among tired boys working by insufficient light with tools designed for adult hands. Ink, prepared weekly by senior students from oak galls, iron sulfate, and gum arabic, thickens in the cold evening air to a consistency that requires frequent warming between the hands before it will flow properly from quill to paper. The paper itself, imported at considerable expense from mills in France or the Low Countries, represents a financial investment that cannot be wasted on false starts, extensive corrections, or the kind of experimental writing that might actually enhance learning through trial and error. Each sheet costs nearly as much as a day's food allowance, creating pressure to produce acceptable work on the first attempt that adds stress to assignments already challenging enough under ideal circumstances. Mistakes cannot be simply discarded and replaced. Instead, they must be carefully scraped away with thin knife blades, process that often weakens the paper and creates rough patches that interfere with subsequent writing. The physical demands of sustained writing under these conditions affect not only the quality of academic work, but also the health and comfort of students, required to maintain precise motor control for extended periods while sitting on uncomfortable benches without back support. Your right hand already cramped from morning composition exercises and afternoon note-taking. Protests against the continued fine movements required for legible script. Your shoulder, strained from leaning forward to capture adequate light from the shared candle flames, has begun to ache in ways that will affect sleep quality and morning readiness for another day's academic challenges. The temperature in the great hall drops steadily as the evening progresses, and the single fireplace proves inadequate to heat the large stone chamber against the increasing cold of the winter night outside. Boys seated near the fire enjoy conditions that make sustained study merely uncomfortable rather than actively painful, while those at the room's far end find themselves working in temperatures that make extended fine motor control increasingly difficult as fingers stiffen and lose sensitivity. The stone floors, practical for cleaning, but problematic for heat retention, conduct cold throughout the room that penetrates thin-soled shoes and rises through wooden benches to affect circulation in legs already cramped from prolonged sitting. The academic content that must be mastered during evening study reflects the ambitious goals of humanistic education while revealing the practical difficulties of achieving those goals under institutional conditions designed more for discipline than weedness and weave, then more for discipline than weed-sided cello. Academic content that must be mastered, they must be reflex. They're a pewing yeast EYT cello. Meat weed cell recute we sell with weed sigh. We sell with disclay cella. We sell with cello I. You sell with we sell amad. By this ella, by na. I will sell with we. Go I sell with sa li lian sawa. You as a sa you it sika gal. I will say I sa we sa to me li li dit. Sika it to slut we to goes you to get these hits. It the Bobby the episis been to web season of failed that's cut that's the best that's look at the hits learning. The Latin grammar exercises that occupy much of your attention require not only memorization of complex rules, but also understanding of exceptions, variations, and subtle distinctions that would challenge university students working under ideal conditions. The classical texts that provide examples and inspiration for student compositions assume familiarity with ancient history, mythology, and cultural practices that bear little relationship to the practical concerns of 16th century English. Life. Yet perhaps most troubling about the evening study period is not the inadequacy of physical conditions or the difficulty of academic content, but the growing realization that the institutional environment actively works against the kind of contemplative engagement that genuine learning requires. The constant pressure of time limitations, disciplinary oversight, and competition with dozens of other students creates conditions where academic work becomes a matter of survival rather than intellectual exploration. Boys learn to produce acceptable results efficiently rather than to think deeply about the material they are studying, to satisfy requirements rather than to develop genuine understanding or appreciation for the classical culture that supposedly justifies their intensive education. As the study period draws toward its close with the approach of the 9 o'clock bell that will signal the end of formal academic activity, you find yourself calculating not what you have learned during this day of intensive instruction, but what physical and mental resources remain for another night's inadequate rest and tomorrow's repetition of the same grinding routine. The elegiac composition that has occupied much of your attention remains imperfect, a source of anxiety that will shadow your sleep and affect your readiness for morning recitation. The Latin grammar that you have been studying seems no more comprehensible despite hours of focused attention, while the classical authors whose wisdom supposedly justifies this intensive education remain as foreign to your experience as if they wrote in hieroglyphics rather than the Latin you have been studying for months. The final bell brings not relief, but simply transition to another form of institutional discomfort. As boys gather their materials and prepare for the migration to dormitory facilities that offer their own challenges to physical comfort and mental peace, the Great Hall, for all its inadequacies as a study environment, at least provides the warmth of human community and the distraction of shared struggle. The dormitory waits with its cold stone walls, inadequate bedding, and primitive facilities that will test your ability to achieve sufficient rest for another day's academic and physical challenges. But as you join the stream of tired boys filing toward the stairs that lead to sleeping quarters, one question dominates your thoughts. What kind of education results from this systematic subordination of physical comfort to institutional efficiency? And whether boys might not learn their classical literature more effectively in circumstances that allowed greater attention to content rather than survival. The social architecture that governs your daily existence operates with the precision of a clockwork mechanism, though its gears and springs remain largely invisible to those caught within its workings. You occupy a specific position within this elaborate hierarchy, neither at its apex nor its base, but somewhere in the complex middle ranges where subtle distinctions of family wealth, academic achievement, length of residence, and personal connections determine everything from where you sleep to whom you may address directly in conversation. The boy who arrived at this institution 6 months ago, confident in his father's wool factor business and proud of his solid preparation in elementary Latin, has gradually learned to navigate relationships that make the royal court seem simple. By comparison, Edmund, whose father's London merchant operations provide access to luxuries that most students can only imagine, occupies the social position that everyone else measures themselves against, though he wears his superiority with the casual indifference of someone who has never known want or uncertainty. His corner sleeping position in the dormitory, his preferential seating at meals, and his freedom from certain disciplinary restrictions reflect not official institutional recognition, but the complex web of favors, obligations, and quiet arrangements that money can purchase even within supposedly egalitarian educational environments. His monthly packages from London containing dried fruits, nuts, preserved meats, and occasionally books not available in the school's limited library, serve as currency in negotiations that determine everything from assistance with difficult assignments to protection from older boys' casual bullying. The distribution of Edmund's largesse follows patterns that reveal sophisticated understanding of institutional politics. Despite his youth, the dried apples and sugared almonds that arrive in his monthly parcels are shared selectively with boys whose friendship provides specific advantages. Younger students, who can serve as messengers or lookouts, academically gifted boys who can assist with challenging translations, and older students whose physical size and established relationships provide protection from the casual violence that characterizes much of school life. The sharing occurs discreetly, usually during the brief periods between formal activities when Brother Marcus's attention focuses elsewhere, but with sufficient visibility to ensure that excluded boys understand their position in the social order. Thomas, despite his family's respectable position in Yorkshire's cloth trade, finds himself perpetually on the margins of these transactions. Neither wealthy enough to command respect through generosity, nor poor enough to qualify for the charitable gestures that occasionally benefit the most obviously disadvantaged students. His father's business provides adequate income for school fees and basic necessities, but no margin for the supplementary expenses that make institutional life bearable: additional food, better clothing, writing materials of superior quality, or the small gifts that purchase social position among teenage boys far from home. The result is a daily negotiation of relationships that requires careful attention to subtle signals, while avoiding the appearance of either presumption or desperation. William, whose family's limited resources mark him as genuinely disadvantaged, within this community of supposedly privileged students, has developed survival strategies that depend on service rather than reciprocity. His superior penmanship, developed through necessity rather than choice, makes him valuable to boys whose own writing fails to meet Master Whitmore's exacting standards. His willingness to perform small tasks, cleaning ink stains from clothing, mending torn papers, organizing another boy's personal belongings, creates relationships based on utility rather than friendship, but provides protection from the casual cruelty that affects students who offer nothing of value to their more fortunate classmates. The academic hierarchies that officially govern school life intersect with but do not override the social distinctions based on family, wealth, and connections. Master Whitmore's evaluations of student performance reflect genuine attention to scholarly merit. Yet his treatment of individual boys reveals subtle awareness of their family circumstances and future prospects that affects everything from the patience he shows with struggling students to the severity of punishments he administers for identical infractions. Boys destined for university study and professional careers receive instruction that assumes continued education, while those whose families plan apprenticeships or commercial pursuits find their academic work evaluated according to different, less demanding standards. The most successful students, those who combine academic ability with social advantages, form an informal leadership group that mediates between institutional authority and student concerns while maintaining their own privileged position within the community. These older boys, typically in their final year before university admission, enjoy freedoms unavailable to younger students: the right to leave the dormitory after evening prayers for limited periods, access to the school's small library without supervision, and most importantly, the authority to discipline younger boys for minor infractions without referring matters to Master Whitmore or Brother Marcus. This system of student leadership serves institutional purposes by reducing the administrative burden on adult authorities while creating aspirational goals for younger boys who hope eventually to achieve similar status. Yet it also institutionalizes the very social distinctions that humanistic education supposedly transcends, ensuring that boys who arrive with advantages leave with even greater privileges, while those who begin at disadvantages find their positions reinforced rather than ameliorated by the educational process. The Latin grammar that all students study equally becomes less important than the social skills required to navigate relationships with peers, superiors, and subordinates in ways that enhance rather than damage personal position. The servant relationships that develop between older and younger boys, between successful and struggling students, and between the well-supplied and the genuinely needy, create parallels to the adult world that students will enter upon completing their education. Younger boys learn to provide services carrying messages, organizing belongings, assisting with personal grooming in exchange for protection, instruction, or simple tolerance from older students, whose goodwill can make the difference between tolerable and miserable institutional experience. These relationships, while never officially acknowledged, become so essential to daily functioning that boys who fail to establish appropriate connections find themselves isolated in ways that affect not only social comfort, but academic performance and physical safety. The complexity of these arrangements reveals itself most clearly during the evening hours, after formal study concludes, when official institutional supervision relaxes and students organize their own social activities within the constraints imposed by dormitory life and institutional regulations. Card games, conducted by candlelight and necessarily involving gambling despite religious prohibitions, create opportunities for boys with access to coins or food items to establish dominance over those whose resources extend no further than the basic necessities provided by school fees. Wrestling matches, theoretically friendly competitions but actually contests for social position, allow physically gifted boys to challenge academic hierarchies while demonstrating the varieties of power that operate within teenage communities. The exchange of information represents another form of currency in this underground economy of student relationships. Boys who receive letters from home become valuable sources of news about political developments, economic conditions, and social changes that affect the broader world beyond institutional walls. Those whose families have connections to court, church, or commercial circles can provide insights into career opportunities and professional networks that may prove valuable for students planning their futures. Access to such information depends not on academic merit, but on family position and personal relationships that determine which boys are included in conversations where valuable knowledge is shared. The religious observances that punctuate every day provide venues for the display and reinforcement of social hierarchies through arrangements that appear neutral but actually privilege students whose family connections or personal resources enable them to participate more fully in institutional spiritual life. The better-dressed boys whose families can afford clothing appropriate for chapel services occupy more prominent positions during daily prayers, while those whose garments reveal family economic limitations find themselves relegated to less visible locations. The ability to contribute coins for charitable offerings, to possess personal prayer books rather than relying on institutional copies, or to demonstrate familiarity with religious practices common in wealthy households creates additional opportunities for social distinction within supposedly sacred contexts. The system reaches its most refined expression in the elaborate protocols that govern student interactions with institutional authorities, where success depends not merely on academic competence, but on sophisticated understanding of how to present oneself, how to respond to questioning, and how to demonstrate the proper mixture of deference and confidence that marks the well-trained gentleman. Boys from families with court connections or professional experience arrive already familiar with such protocols, while those from merchant or yeoman backgrounds must learn through observation and error the behavioral codes that determine how their academic performance will be received and evaluated. Master Whitmore's office hours, during which students may request assistance with difficult assignments or clarification of academic requirements, become exercises in social performance, as much as educational consultation. The boy who approaches with appropriate deference, speaks in properly modulated tones, and demonstrates familiarity with classical references that extend beyond required Coursework receives not only academic assistance, but the kind of personal attention that can make the difference between adequate and distinguished performance. Students who lack such social graces find their requests handled efficiently but impersonally, receiving information rather than instruction and correction rather than encouragement. The cumulative effect of these countless small distinctions creates an educational environment where social advancement becomes as important as academic achievement, where success depends not only on mastering Latin grammar, but on understanding the unwritten rules that govern human relationships within hierarchical institutions. Boys learn not only classical literature, but also the arts of negotiation, the value of strategic friendships, and the importance of maintaining appropriate relationships with both superiors and subordinates. Lesson that may prove more valuable in their adult careers than anything they absorb from Cicero or Virgil. Yet, as you observe these complex social dynamics from your position in the institutional middle ranges, a troubling question begins to form: whether an educational system that so thoroughly reproduces the social distinctions students bring from their family backgrounds can legitimately claim to provide opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than inheritance. The answer may determine not only your own future prospects, but the very meaning of the educational process that Nietzsche consumes these crucial years of your youth. The morning recitation period reveals the intricate social choreography that transforms a simple academic exercise into a complex performance of hierarchy, deference, and calculated risk-taking that affects not only immediate academic standing, but long-term social position within the institutional community. Master Whitmore's call for volunteers to recite yesterday's assigned passage from Virgil creates a moment of strategic calculation where each boy must weigh his preparation against the potential benefits and dangers of public performance, knowing that success or failure will be witnessed by every member of his peer group and evaluated according to criteria that extend far beyond simple accuracy in translation or pronunciation. Edmund steps forward with the confidence of someone who's superior. Resources have provided advantages unavailable to most of his classmates. Access to additional texts that clarify difficult passages. Private tutoring from educated servants in his father's household. And most importantly, the security that comes from knowing that academic failure will not result in removal from school or loss of future opportunities. His recitation, delivered in the carefully modulated tones that mark gentle upbringing, demonstrates not only mastery of the assigned material, but familiarity with literary and cultural references that suggest broader reading beyond the schools. Basic curriculum. Master Whitmore's response a brief nod of approval, followed by questions that probe deeper understanding rather than basic comprehension, acknowledges Edmund's superior preparation while reinforcing his position at the top of the academic hierarchy. The questions that Master Whitmore poses to Edmund reveal the sophisticated expectations reserved for students whose family backgrounds and demonstrated abilities mark them as potential scholars rather than mere recipients of basic education, instead of simple requests for translation or grammatical analysis. Edmund faces inquiries about Virgil's debt to Homer, the political implications of the Aeneid within Augustine's literary culture, and the relationship between classical, epic, and contemporary European poetry. These advanced questions, impossible for most 16-year-old boys to answer adequately, serve multiple purposes. They distinguish genuinely gifted students from those who merely complete assignments competently. They provide intellectual stimulation for boys capable of advanced work, and they establish clear boundaries between future university scholars and those destined for more practical careers. Edmund's responses, while not always complete or entirely accurate, demonstrate the kind of intellectual curiosity and cultural sophistication that Master Whitmore seeks to cultivate in his most promising students. His willingness to venture educated guesses about complex literary questions, his familiarity with classical and contemporary authors beyond the required curriculum, and his ability to express complex ideas in fluent Latin mark him as the kind of student who justifies the school's educational mission, while providing satisfaction for a master whose own scholarly training prepared him for more advanced instruction than most grammar school positions typically provide. The contrast becomes apparent when Thomas rises to attempt the same passage, his voice betraying the nervousness that accompanies public performance when adequate preparation must compensate for the lack of social and educational advantages that others take for granted. His recitation, while accurate in its basic elements, lacks the fluency and confidence that mark superior preparation, while his responses to Master Whitmore's questions reveal the limitations imposed by exclusive reliance on classroom instruction. Without supplementary resources or advanced preparation, Master Whitmore's treatment of Thomas illustrates the complex balance between institutional fairness and recognition of realistic limitations that characterizes competent teaching within hierarchical educational systems. His questions, while covering the same basic material addressed with Edmund, focus on fundamental comprehension rather than advanced interpretation, seeking to ensure that Thomas has mastered essential concepts while avoiding the kind of probing inquiry that would only reveal inadequate preparation and create unnecessary humiliation. The result is instruction that meets each student's needs while reinforcing, rather than challenging, the social distinctions they bring from their family backgrounds. The other students observe these performances with attention that reflects their own strategic concerns about academic positioning and social relationships within the classroom community. Boys whose turn approaches calculate the advantages and risks of different approaches. Attempting to emulate Edmund's confident performance risks humiliation if preparation proves inadequate, while settling for Thomas's more modest success ensures safety at the cost of missing opportunities for advancement. The choices made in these moments create reputation and establish patterns of expectation that affect not only immediate academic standing, but future opportunities for advancement within the school's informal hierarchy. William, whose limited family resources require him to excel academically if he hopes to achieve university admission through scholarship support, faces pressures that differ from those affecting his more fortunate classmates. His recitation must demonstrate not only adequate preparation but exceptional ability that marks him as worthy of continued investment despite his obvious social disadvantages. The performance requires careful balance between confidence and humility, showing sufficient capability to merit recognition while avoiding any appearance of presumption that might antagonize classmates whose goodwill he needs for daily survival. William's strategy, developed through months of careful observation and calculated risk-taking, involves focusing on technical accuracy rather than interpretive sophistication, demonstrating mastery of grammatical principles and textual details that require intensive study but not the kind of cultural knowledge available only through extensive reading and educated conversation. His recitations typically earn qualified approval from Master Whitmore, recognition of diligent effort and basic competence rather than the genuine enthusiasm reserved for naturally gifted or exceptionally well-prepared students. The correction process that follows each recitation provides additional opportunities for the display and reinforcement of social hierarchies through the manner in which errors are addressed and improvement is encouraged. Master Whitmore's corrections to Edmund, when necessary, take the form of gentle guidance designed to refine understanding rather than address fundamental inadequacies, often including suggestions for additional reading or more sophisticated approaches to interpretation that assume access to resources and time unavailable to most students. His corrections to less privileged students focus on immediate, practical concerns, proper pronunciation, basic grammatical understanding, and accurate translation that ensures competent performance without aspiring to genuine scholarly excellence. The physical aspects of recitation performance posture, voice projection, eye contact, and general demeanor become markers of social distinction as important as academic content in determining how individual performances are received and evaluated. Boys from gentle families arrive already familiar with the conventions of public speaking and formal social interaction that make confident academic performance possible, while those from merchant or yeoman backgrounds must learn through observation and error the behavioral codes that affect how their knowledge is perceived and valued. The seating arrangements during recitation periods reflect and reinforce the social hierarchies that govern all aspects of institutional life, with the most privileged students occupying positions near master Whitmore's desk, where they can easily be called upon for demonstration, while less favored boys find themselves relegated to the room's periphery, where they may observe, but rarely participate in the kind of sophisticated academic discourse reserved for potential scholars. These arrangements, while never officially acknowledged, become so consistent that students learn to expect certain types of treatment based on their assigned positions within the classroom's social geography. The aftermath of recitation periods provides opportunities for informal social interaction that reveals the complex relationships between academic performance and peer group dynamics within the student community. Edmund's successful performances earn him not only Master Whitmore's approval, but also the kind of respectful attention from classmates that translates into social influence extending far beyond academic matters. His willingness to assist struggling students with difficult assignments, and such assistance serves his own interests in maintaining leadership position, creates relationships of obligation and gratitude that enhance his informal authority within the peer group. Thomas's adequate but unremarkable performances place him in the large middle group of students whose social position depends not on academic distinction, but on their ability to navigate relationships with both superiors and subordinates without attracting negative attention from either institutional authorities or peer group leaders. His survival strategy involves maintaining friendly relationships with boys across the social spectrum while avoiding commitments or conflicts that might force him to choose sides in disputes that could affect his precarious position within the community. The competitive element inherent in public recitation creates dynamics that extend beyond simple academic evaluation into areas of personal rivalry and social positioning that affect relationships among boys who must live in close proximity, while competing for limited opportunities for advancement and recognition. Success in recitation brings not only academic benefits, but also enhanced social status that affects everything from dormitory arrangements to inclusion in informal activities, while repeated failure can result in social isolation that makes institutional life nearly unbearable. Yet perhaps most troubling about the recitation process is the way it reinforces educational inequalities while maintaining the fiction of equal opportunity based on merit and effort. Boys who arrive with advantages leave with even greater privileges, while those who begin at disadvantages find their positions confirmed rather than ameliorated by the educational process. The Latin literature that all students study becomes less important than the social performances that determine how that knowledge is received and valued within hierarchical institutional structures. As you observe these daily exhibitions of academic competence and social positioning, a fundamental question emerges about the relationship between education and opportunity within systems designed to reproduce rather than challenge existing social arrangements. Whether schools that so thoroughly reflect the inequalities students bring from their family backgrounds can legitimately claim to provide advancement based on individual merit rather than inherited advantage. The evening study period transforms the Great Hall into a theater of subtle social negotiations where the acquisition of knowledge becomes secondary to the complex relationships that determine which boys will receive assistance, protection, and the kind of informal instruction that often proves more valuable than formal classroom teaching. The distribution of limited resources, adequate lighting, Comfortable seating positions, access to reference materials, and most importantly, help from more capable students follows patterns that reveal the sophisticated understanding of institutional politics that boys develop to survive and advance within hierarchical educational environments. The arrangement of study groups reflects careful calculations about mutual benefit that extend far beyond simple academic collaboration into areas of social strategy and long-term relationship building that will affect not only immediate school experience, but future professional opportunities in the adult world beyond institutional walls. Edmund's Evening Circle, consisting of 4 carefully selected boys whose family connections and academic abilities complement his own advantages, operates as both study group and informal social club where information, resources, and influence are exchanged according to protocols that mirror the professional and political relationships these boys will navigate in their adult careers. The selection criteria for inclusion in such elite study groups reveal the complex intersection of academic merit and social advantage that determines educational outcomes within supposedly meritocratic institutions. Academic ability alone proves insufficient for membership. Boys must also demonstrate appropriate social background, access to supplementary resources that benefit the entire group, and most importantly, the kind of personal discretion that ensures group activities remain invisible to institutional authorities, who might disapprove of arrangements that provide some students with advantages unavailable to others. Your own position within this evening social landscape reflects the ambiguous middle ground between privilege and disadvantage that characterizes most students' institutional experience. Your father's wool factor business provides sufficient resources to purchase basic necessities and supplementary materials, but not enough to command inclusion in the most exclusive study groups or to purchase the kind of systematic assistance that transforms adequate students into exceptional ones. The result is a daily negotiation of relationships that requires careful attention to opportunities for mutual benefit while avoiding the appearance of either presumption or desperation that might damage your standing within the peer community. Thomas, whose family circumstances provide even less margin for educational supplements, has developed survival strategies that depend on service relationships with more privileged students who can provide academic assistance in exchange for practical help with daily tasks that wealthy boys prefer to delegate to others. His superior penmanship makes him valuable for copying assignments, preparing fair copies of compositions, and creating the kind of meticulous notes that support other students. Academic success while enhancing his own understanding through the process of careful transcription. These service relationships, while never officially acknowledged, become essential elements of institutional functioning that allow privileged students to focus their time and energy on advanced academic work while ensuring that ensuring that boys whose social position requires them to provide labor in exchange for education and protection. The arrangements create dependencies that extend beyond simple academic collaboration into areas of personal loyalty and social obligation that shape character formation as much as classical literature study. William True's scholarship status places him in the most precarious position within the student hierarchy. Must navigate relationships that balance genuine academic excellence against the social deference required to maintain his position within a community that tolerates his presence only because his intellectual abilities serve institutional purposes. His evening study involves not only completing his personal assignments, but also providing assistance to struggling students whose goodwill protects him from the casual cruelty that affects boys who offer nothing of value to their more fortunate classmates. The informal instruction that occurs during evening study often proves more valuable than formal classroom teaching because it addresses individual student needs while providing explanation and encouragement tailored to specific learning difficulties, rather than general curriculum requirements. Boys who struggle with Latin syntax receive patient tutoring from classmates who have mastered complex grammatical principles, while those who lack cultural background for understanding classical literature gain access to explanations that connect ancient texts to contemporary concerns in ways that make memorization meaningful rather than merely mechanical. Yet this informal instruction system reinforces, rather than challenges the social hierarchies that determine educational outcomes, as boys who provide assistance naturally expect gratitude, deference, and various forms of repayment that create relationships of obligation extending far beyond specific academic transactions. The most capable students learn to use their abilities strategically, to build networks of support and influence that enhance their institutional experience while creating advantages that extend into their professional careers. The competition. For Master Whitmore's attention during evening study periods reveals additional dimensions of institutional hierarchy, as boys compete not only for academic assistance, but for the kind of personal recognition that affects long-term educational and career prospects. Students who demonstrate exceptional ability or unusual dedication receive informal mentoring that provides access to advanced texts, guidance about university preparation, and, most importantly, the kind of personal recommendation that can make the difference between admission to prestigious institutions and settlement for less distinguished alternatives. Master Whitmore's distribution of personal attention reflects his understanding of each student's potential and family circumstances in ways that maximize institutional success while acknowledging realistic limitations imposed by social and economic factors beyond individual control. Boys destined for university study receive instruction that assumes continued education and professional careers requiring sophisticated intellectual abilities, while those whose families plan apprenticeships or commercial pursuits find their academic work evaluated according to different standards that emphasize practical competence rather than scholarly excellence. The evening hours also provide opportunities for the kind of informal social education that prepares boys for adult participation in hierarchical, professional, and political environments, where success depends as much on relationship management as on technical competence. Card games, conducted discreetly to avoid institutional disapproval, create opportunities for learning the protocols of adult social interaction while providing venues for the kind of strategic taking that characterizes successful careers in law, government, and commerce, the gambling that inevitably accompanies such games, despite religious prohibitions and institutional regulations, serves educational purposes that extend beyond simple entertainment into areas of character formation and practical training for adult responsibilities. Boys learn to assess risk, manage resources, maintain composure under pressure, and most importantly, navigate the complex relationships between competition and cooperation that define professional success in hierarchical social systems. The exchange of information during evening social activities creates an informal curriculum that complements formal academic instruction while providing access to knowledge about contemporary political, economic, and social developments that may prove more valuable than classical literature in preparing boys for adult careers. Students whose families have connections to court, church, or commercial circles share insights about career opportunities, professional networks, and social changes that affect the broader world beyond institutional walls. Access to such information depends not on academic merit, but on family position and personal relationships that determine which boys are included in conversations where valuable knowledge is shared. The most privileged students naturally possess the most current and comprehensive information about opportunities and challenges that await educated young men, while less fortunate boys must rely on whatever intelligence they can gather through careful observation and strategic relationship building. The physical environment of evening study reinforces social hierarchies through arrangements that appear neutral but actually privilege students, whose resources enable them to participate more fully in informal educational activities. Boys with access to additional candles, supplementary writing materials, and personal books enjoy advantages that affect not only their individual academic performance, but also their ability to provide assistance to others, and thereby build the kind of social networks that determine institutional success. As the evening study period draws toward its conclusion with the approach of the final bell, you find yourself reflecting on the complex relationship between formal education and social reproduction that characterizes institutional life. The Latin grammar that all students study equally becomes less important than the social skills required to navigate relationships with peers, superiors, and subordinates in ways that enhance rather than damage personal position within hierarchical communities. The boys who succeed in this environment learn not only classical literature, but also the arts of negotiation, the value of strategic friendships, and the importance of maintaining appropriate relationships with both superiors and subordinates, lessons that may prove more valuable in their adult careers than anything they absorb from Cicero or Virgil. Yet the process raises fundamental questions about whether educational institutions can legitimately claim to provide opportunities based on merit when their social structures so thoroughly reproduce the advantages and disadvantages that students bring from their family backgrounds. The answer to that question may determine not only your own future prospects, but the very meaning of Cormo, a de-educational process that consumes these crucial years of your development, transforming boys who arrive with different social positions into men whose advantages and limitations have been confirmed rather than challenged by their encounter with humanistic learning. Asterisk, as you drift toward sleep on your thin straw mattress, surrounded by the soft breathing of 46 other boys, you realize that the education you are receiving extends far beyond Latin grammar and classical literature into lessons about power, hierarchy, and social survival that will shape the rest of your life. The question that follows you into dreams is whether these lessons serve to create better men or simply to perpetuate the inequalities that brought you all to this cold stone chamber in the first place. Asterisk.